Hey everybody, I am back with a brand new video, and you'd be glad to know that I'm finishing up my Luffy versus Nami video that I started about like a month ago and like that. So we will be discussing part 3 of the video, or should I say part Z? Yeah, like who in the right mind came up with part 3? I mean, it goes part 1, then part 2, and then part Z. It just makes a lot of sense, all right? I mean, and you guys totally agree with me, right? Right? Hey, who's writing that? Who's ever writing that? Knock it off. Stop it! Let's just get on with the video, okay? Alright. So yes, we will be going over part Z in the video. It's like that. Now you're probably wondering and asking, what does the Z stand for? Like what does the Z supposed to mean? What is Z anyway, okay? Well, to basically establish what I'm setting up here, let me remind everyone what the 2 previous videos were supposed to be and how they were basically narrated and like that, okay? The first one was basically the setup and premise of like where I believed that they could actually face off and fight, and how I actually believed it could occur, and why I saw it as a possibility. Okay. Then the second one was basically the end results or the aftermath after the fight, like what exactly could occur or happen to the relationship that could help further along it or even separate it like that. Like what could be the end results of it after the fight ended. And in this video, it's going to be something similar to that, but very much different. So the Z is going to focus on 2 words, okay? Zero and Zenith, okay? Now, the key details here is in what these words mean, and we're going to use these 2 words to look over the different biggest relationships between Luffy and Nami over the course of the series and see if it's reached Zero or Zenith, okay? Now, what do these 2 words mean? Well, they're basically the opposite of each other, but they're not necessarily in the same categories like that, okay? 0 is the lowest number that comes before 1, right? And 0 basically means something that has no number of a value, right? It basically is nothing, right? Like 0 basically means something that has no value or measure of anything of any kind, right? It's basically the lowest point of the numbering system, okay? And then Zenith is basically the opposite of that, except Zenith doesn't necessarily refer to a number itself. I mean, you could refer to it as like infinity in that regards, because infinity is never endless, but Zenith doesn't necessarily mean something that is never ending. Zenith just basically means the highest point, basically the highest point. So a good way to look at that is like 100. Like 100 is usually, typically where I'm at. I'm not sure how this is done in every other school around the world, but 100 points can usually be the highest in the grading system that one can actually achieve. At least that's how most times I understand it's like that, is 100, okay? But then there are some other things you can look at as well. Like a good example of this could be like, the highest that a human can actually walk, like the highest that a human can actually go on the earth, like that's walking on the earth. And I believe that would be one of the mountains, like Mount Everest and like that. I believe that's the highest or tallest mountain in the world. Is the highest that they can reach where they're still walking on the land itself, rather than getting in a plane or something like that. Okay. And what's funny and ironic here? Before we get into the discussion of the videos like that, another good point to pull out here is that there's a character who actually fits these 2 descriptions very well, and that would be Emu himself. Now, you're probably asking, like, how? Well, to put it simple, Emu refers to himself as Mu, okay? And Mu in Japanese can translate into nothing, okay? And just like I said, 0 can also mean a value of something that is nothing, okay? They're not necessarily the same words, but they can mean a reference something if you know the reference, okay? And then Emu, who basically refers to himself as Mu, meaning nothing, and yet no one knows his identity, he reigns supreme at the very top of the world government, right? He's basically at the high peak of the center. Like, he's literally at the very top. He's literally at the zenith when it comes to controlling the entire world government, okay? Literally anything he decides is his decision, right? And it's ironic when you think about this, is that I'll get more back into Emu a little bit later and like that, but I just wanted to bring that up because I really think it's pretty interesting here. And, it might actually bring in a good idea of why I sort of believe that Luffy and Nami could have their battle or face-off at Mary Joie. That's one of the many places I've actually listed as a possibility where they can actually fight, okay? And if you're probably wondering exactly, well, how exactly they're going to fight. In case you're new to this video, I'll have a link down to the 2 previous videos and like that. But just to give a quick heads up on how I believe that they could actually fight. So I've been on a sort of a kick or a bit of an overdose lately of this potential Nami getting Devil Fruit, maintaining like similarities to Luffy and stuff like that. Like I've gone over the name as the Nico no Mi, where it turns the user's body into glass. Okay. I've had multiple videos on that as like that, so you can feel free to check it out. But to lay down the simple answer, you're all familiar with Chopper's Rumble Balls, okay? Well, I basically laid down the possibility of like what could occur or happen if someone like Luffy or even Nami, who has attained this Devil Fruit, actually eats one of the Rumble Balls, and it basically causes a conflict or confrontation where one of them has to fight the other in order to like help them out, or basically do something in the meantime in order to prevent them from getting hurt or hurting others, okay? So that's just basically a quick laydown like that. Now keep in mind, I'm sure even if Oda does have a fight between Luffy and Nami, and it doesn't go around the Delph for rounds like that, I still think Oda can actually do a great job providing his own ideas and how it can actually work, okay? But that was just something for me to lay down, okay? Alright, let's get on to the actual video, okay? So, what we're going to be doing here, I'm going to be going over the most perfect relationships that Luffy and Nami has had over the entire course of the series, right? Now, there might be some things that I probably didn't mention like that. I mean, One Piece is a long series, so some of you might think there's probably better options to actually add here, but I'm going to go over the ones that I chose because I feel like they're the most, it would be the most important to reference, and we're going to be focusing on two categories between Zero and Zenith, okay? And we're going to use these to basically rate if something of the relationship is considered Zero or Zenith, okay? Now, you can disagree with me all you want, and you can provide your own statements and opinions in the comment sections below, okay? So let's get on with the video, okay? So thank you so much for joining me, and I'm glad you're sticking around. My name is Cliff Ford, and let's get on to the video. All right. So I think the best place to start is actually where the biggest relationship actually began like that was during the Arlong Park arc, where basically Nami's home village was under the control of Arlong and like that. Okay, so probably the biggest moment here that really started the fire between Luffy and Nami. I mean, some people might say it's when they first met, but it really didn't actually kick off until the Arlong Park arc when Nami basically broke down and basically asked Luffy for help. Right, when because keep in mind, right. Nami went through most of her entire life being a slave of Arlong's like that, drawing maps that that he had her draw for him. It's like that. And he basically made a promise or a deal with her that I will free your village if you bring me what was it, like 100 million berries? It was something like that. So Nami basically went out in the world like that, running from pirates that she had robbed for most of her life. And then all of a sudden, she meets this crazy pirate kid, and it's like that, who wants to become king of the pirates, who doesn't even know anything of what he's doing. And out of all the things that happen in the world like that, Nami basically hates pirates, and yet she breaks down in tears, asks Luffy for help, and Luffy just basically puts his hat on her head and shouts out, "You know I will." The interesting thing to point out here is actually Luffy's hat, because it's basically the symbol of the connection here, okay? And Luffy's hat is basically his treasure, right? He got that hat from Shanks, and Nami was one of the many people who actually first learned about Luffy's hat being such an iconic treasure to him. And when you get this moment here, when Nami basically remembers Luffy calling the hat his treasure, him passing on the hat to Nami or giving the hat to Nami doesn't just show the fact that the hat is his treasure. He's considering his crew members, including Nami, a treasure as well. And this is what makes something special here in this moment. It's like that, okay? Because Nami is basically realizing that Luffy, while he is not the very brightest thing in the world, like that, he's a good soul who will consider a human's life. He will consider a person's life a treasure of value to him. Something that cannot be bought or sold, something that is meant to be cherished and protected, okay? And that's how Luffy sees Nami in that moment, okay? Another key point detail to point out here is that if we were to rewind the clock back and ask ourselves a very important question here, let's say if Luffy actually lost the battle. Now, hold on, don't get upset, okay? Just let me finish my statement, okay? Let me finish it, okay? If that moment happened and Luffy actually lost, keep in mind that hat would technically belong to Nami. I mean, Nami does know it probably belongs to Shanks, but even then, when Luffy mentioned that he had gotten it from someone that he made a promise to, he never actually specifically said Shanks. At least as far as I'm aware of. I went back and read the mangas like that, but as far as I'm aware of, and I even watched the anime, but as far as I'm aware of, I don't think he ever mentioned Shanks exactly. I mean, maybe in different parts of the world or in some translations, but I don't ever remember him saying Shanks. I could be wrong about that. If I am, I do apologize. Okay. But to basically continue here, as we continue on like that, Luffy basically fights against Arlong like that. But probably another good moment here is when Luffy basically enters the room where Nami was at most of her life, and he basically sees and understands the trouble that she's gone through when he looks at the pin and discovers that the pin has been soaked with blood and stuff like that. Nami has been drawing maps for long so much that her blood has basically soaked into the pin. And when Luffy basically destroys the entire room and basically tears it down, you see the tears on Nami when she basically says thank you for Luffy, okay? And it's really such a great moment to basically start it off. Sure, it doesn't necessarily have to be the biggest thing, but it's enough to get the flames started and for it to slowly build up until it starts bursting into flames, okay? Now, but the real question is, should we consider this Zero or Zenith? Now, I don't think we can necessarily consider Zero or Zenith in that category just yet for the relationship, because the relationship is still going forward, right? And keep in mind, right? I know there are a lot of people out there who would want Luffy to be with Hancock. Some people want Luffy to be with Vivi and stuff like that. In my personal opinion, I'm willing to let Oda make his own decisions in life. If Oda is going to let Luffy be with someone else and it's not Nami, it will be very devastating. But I can accept it, right? I can get over it, and I can let the author tell his own story, right? And truth be told, there are some relationships between Luffy that make sense and some of them that don't, alright? And I'm sorry, but that's the case for me, okay? Luffy and Nami makes sense. Luffy and Vivi makes sense. Luffy and Robin makes sense. I'm sorry, but Luffy and Hancock, that does not make any sense to me, alright? I am sorry, but it doesn't make any sense. But should we consider Zero or Zenith? Not yet. But there are some situations that we can consider Zero or Zenith in that category, okay? We can consider it Zenith in the regards of, like, saying, like, Nami's freedom, right? Her home village's freedom from Orlong, like that, right? It's, not like sure, like, Zenith basically means, like, the highest point of something, but we don't necessarily use that in the like, literal sense, right? Think of it as being, like, what's the word? Like, mental sense, spiritual sense? Whatever the word I should be using, okay? We can use it in that regard, okay? And Zero could be like I said, for example, if Luffy lost the fight, then that can be considered Zero, because basically Nami's hope of being free has basically gone down the drain since Luffy and everyone and the others lost. Zero could be if, say, for instance, if Nami basically probably took the route that Vivi did. Remember when after Crocodile was defeated, Vivi decided to stay in her home village to help him out. Imagine if Nami made the same decision and decided to stay in her village to help them out instead of going with Luffy. It can consider Zero because of the fact that Luffy had to accept the fact that the person that he wanted to be his navigator could not be his navigator, and he had to move on and accept it. Okay, so if you're liking everything so far, go ahead and tell me. Go ahead and leave in the comment section and tell me what you think of this so far. Okay, let's move on to the next one. The next one we will discuss will be, how about, okay, we'll do with this one. The Drum Island arc, and like that. So during this arc, Nami actually became sick after the events of Little Garden, okay? It was the same arc where they basically ran into Mr. 3, where they met Dory and Bragi and all that kind of stuff, okay? Well, during the events of this, Nami basically became sick, and she needed to find a doctor, okay? So they basically sailed to an island, Drum Islands like that, where they meet Dr. Greya and Chopper, right? Chopper becoming the future doctor of the Straw Hat Pirates, okay? Well, some key details to point out here is that throughout most of the entire arc, Nami is basically sick, and soon she's able to meet Dr. Greya and manages to save her, okay? Some key moments here is that, Luffy, when they basically find out that there is a doctor and stuff like that, and they realize and learn where the doctor lives, there's not enough time for, basically what goes on here is that Luffy basically tells Nami is that we can't wait around for the doctor to come, I gotta bring you to the doctor myself, okay? And Nami basically puts her trust in Luffy, even though everyone else is telling Luffy that might not be such the best idea, right? Taking her out in this weather is really the biggest mistake. And Luffy does not think very wisely of this and stuff like that, he does not think very clearly, but what basically occurs here that Nami is willing to trust Luffy, okay? For this judgment, right? She's willing to trust Luffy for this at all costs, right? And Nami knows how idiotic and stupid that Luffy can be and make dumb decisions, okay? But she's willing to trust Luffy for this, even though she knows in her right mind that's probably not the best decision. And keep in mind, some people might argue and say that Nami was very sick, she doesn't know what she was talking about. I feel like in that moment, even though Nami was sick, she was still smart enough to know the difference between right and wrong and something that should be done and something that should not be done, okay? But that's just me. You can have your own opinions, okay? But they basically continue on here. As we continue on the stories like that, Luffy along with Sanji goes to take Nami to the doctor, okay? And after Sanji is basically injured, Luffy has to carry both Nami and Sanji up this giant mountain, and he basically climbs with his bare hands with no clothes to keep him warm, alright? And keep in mind, Drum Island is entirely covered with snow, right? Deep, deep snow, or anything like that, okay? And when they get to the top and like that, Dr. Greya basically mentions that while Luffy and Sanji are in terrible conditions, the worst one of any of them is Nami, because she basically describes Nami on the verge of death. She's dying, alright? Keep that in mind. While Luffy and Sanji were in bad conditions, they were not dying. Nami was actually dying. That's something to actually consider here. The fact that, while Luffy does make bad decisions and he makes big mistakes and something that he shouldn't do, even though Nami knows this and understands this, she was willing to put that aside and let Luffy and trust Luffy's judgment. That really goes to show you that the fact that Nami knows how Luffy is, but she also knows what he can do when he believes he's doing the right thing, all right? And it does bring up some really good moments and stuff like that, some really good moments. So, but should we consider Zero or Zenith? In a way, probably not yet, okay? We consider Zenith in the regards of, like, say it's the highest that Luffy's ever climbed with his bare hand, okay? Because I believe Zunisha is higher and stuff like that, but Luffy didn't actually climb Zunisha with his bare hands and stuff like that, or he never actually climbed Zunisha with his bare hands. Okay, so we can consider this the highest that Luffy's ever climbed using his bare hands. Okay, we might consider it 0 if, say, and just saying, if Nami actually did die, right? If they actually failed and Luffy had to live with the consequences that it might have been his actions that actually caused it, right? That they basically, Luffy lost. Like, he had to just accept the fact that Nami's no longer there and coming back. We can consider 0 in that sense. Alright. Let's move on to the next one. Alright, so I think for the next one we will discuss will be, let's go with the Skyland Arc, okay? So, the Skyland Arc is a pretty interesting arc. It's the arc where basically the Straw Crew go up into the sky, where they basically meet this Inaru guy who basically believes himself to be God, okay? Well, the interesting thing to point out here is during this arc is that Luffy actually needed Nami in order to help him defeat Inaru, right? Not in the sense of like not like they're tag teaming, like, you know, Luffy is basically tired, he needs something to eat, so Nami's putting in her hand in the ring. It's like, tag me, Luffy! I'll fight Inaru until you get your strength back. Nothing like that, okay? But Nami basically knew how to drive this waiver thing, and Luffy needed Nami's help in order to get to the top of the beanstalk in order to face off against Inaru, right? Now, keep in mind, Inaru basically has the Gorgonami, and even though Luffy was superior like that, Inaru basically excelled at other things that Luffy did not lot. So he was a pretty challenging guy for Luffy, right? Even though Luffy, Delphi made him immune to most of Inaru's attacks, okay? Now, even though the overall basics of the entire island and stuff like that, the entire story of the Sky Island arc have really nothing to do with like Luffy and Nami's relationship at any regards. I mean, there are some good moments. The fact that you know, Nami was basically going to be taken to Fairy Birth, or basically the dream world that Inaru was going to with his Maxim, and basically what basically the whole moments and like that where Nami was one of the many strides to basically witness the fight between Inaru and Luffy, and to see that Luffy is basically the natural enemy of Inaru and like that, the natural enemy of Inaru, okay? But to basically continue here, one good key point we can point here is that Oda basically did mention that if Nami were to have a Devil Fruit, it would be the Gorgonami, okay? That is an interesting point here, so because the fact that Nami is basically, like Nami or anyone else basically mentions that the natural enemy of something, and yet Nami getting a Devil Fruit that is basically the enemy of the Rubber Fruit, basically goes to show you that even though these two, Oda describes these two on the opposite sides, they have great connections to make them work together. And that's really interesting when you think about it. But should we consider it 0 or Zenith? Well, not yet. We can probably consider it Zenith in the regards of, like, say, you know, it's the highest that Luffy's ever gone in his entire life. Like, literally the highest that he's ever been in the One Piece world. The highest that he's ever gone before, okay? We can probably consider it 0 if, say, for instance, if Luffy actually did lose, okay? And he had to accept the fact that he lost, okay? We consider it in that regards, okay? Now, Luffy's lost fights before, and I don't mean, like, lost in the sense of, like, you know, like, you lose one fight, and then you decide to come back and fight again, okay? That's not what I mean, alright? I mean lost in the regards of, like, you lose and you give up, right? You don't want to play anymore, right? It's kind of like if you're playing a video game, and then, you know, like, you, like, say, for instance, like, if you die on a video games like that, and when you get a game over, you sometimes get the option of video games to basically, do you want to start again, like that, or play again, right? And you can choose yes, or you can choose no, which then results in you basically giving up. Now, in terms of video games, you can always, like, restart and play again, but let's use this in more of the actual literal sense of saying, like, you know, if you give up, you give up, right? There's no second chances, okay? Making the stakes much, much higher. So, maybe for the next one, we will discuss, let's see, what's the next best thing? How about Strong World, okay? So Strong World is probably one of the biggest relationships with Luffy and Nami that's ever been done in the entire story, okay? The three central characters throughout the entire movie that really have the main focus point of anything for a really narrative is Luffy, Nami, and Shiki, okay? So what basically occurs in the movie is that Shiki, who is this pirate, who is around the golden age of, like, Roger and all those famous pirates like that, who is actually part of the Rock's crew, Shiki is basically amazed that of Nami's ability to basically read and not manipulate, but basically read the weather and like that. And he basically becomes amazed by her talents, that he goes as far as long as kidnapping Nami and taking her and making her his navigator, okay? Back when Oda was first writing Strong World, and keep in mind, Strong World was the first One Piece film officially written by Oda, and he basically said that he wanted to have a movie where the hero saved the heroine. And during the course of the development of the story, there were a lot of changes that went throughout the story, right? Like, one thing that I've read and heard before, that Oda was originally going to have Nami's backstory sort of explained in the movie. but his I believe his editors told him that it would be too much of it'd be too much for the readers to handle, because I believe that the original script of the story was far more devastating. It was far more sad. So he basically Oda rewrote it to have a bit more of a lighter tone. Now keep in mind, the story does have some very dramatic moments in there, and like that, but it's basically far different than what was originally given, and like that, where a lot of changes were necessarily made. But it's still a good film, right? And some people consider it their best One Piece film overall. But as we continue, there are some good moments in the film that basically provide how much Nami actually cares for Luffy and how much Luffy actually cares for Nami. Okay, a good example of this could be Nami's message. Okay, so when Nami basically leaves this message on this conch shell, or I believe it's a conch shell. I might be calling it the wrong thing, okay? But basically what occurs is that Nami leaves a message for her crew members and stuff like that she's going to go with Shiki, okay? And she basically leaves the message. However, the problem lies in the fact that Luffy gets, Luffy basically gets upset by the message, okay? And Nami even mentions that she directed that message to Luffy. And what I mean by this is the fact that if Luffy would have just waited like 5 or 10 seconds after after her main message had ended, where she said she was going to go with Shiki, Nami basically left a secret message at the end saying, "If you don't believe me, come and save me," all right? Nami always wanted Luffy to come and save her, right? And a really good point to point out here is that Sanji even mentioned that the whole thing sounded like a love letter, or basically a love message, whatever you prefer. And in regards, he's actually right. That's kind of what it was. And that's how many LuffyNami fans actually see it, and they actually agree with him, okay? But, which is kind of ironic here when you think about it. Like, many hardcore LuffyNami fans like that who want Luffy to end up with Nami like that could easily agree on the fact that, yes, that is probably, they can totally agree with Sanji on that, okay? And basically, there are some interesting things to point out, some things that I want to explain on my regards like that. Now, Luffy basically gets upset by the message, right? He's very upset by the message like that. And even though he goes to the hotel trying to listen to the message again, Nami basically is embarrassed by it because she's because when he first heard the message, she wasn't there, right? But now she's there, and she doesn't want him to hear it because it's too embarrassing, and she doesn't want him to hear that. However, I would have to say in regards that I don't blame Luffy, okay? In my opinion, Nami was more in the wrong than anything, and I know some people might disagree with me and say that's not the case. And look, I get the message, okay? But in the regards, Nami was completely out of line, okay? And let me explain, okay? Luffy's always been the kind of person to always try and do something for someone, right? Luffy does not need some kind of secret message at the end where you basically leave and say, yes, come and save me, right? It makes no sense to basically leave a message and tell Luffy, it's like, I'm sorry, Luffy, you can't beat Shiki, all right? I'm gonna go with Shiki, and then all of a sudden leave a secret message at the end and say, like, if you don't believe me, come and save me. Look, I'm sorry, but that is not how things should work, right? Luffy doesn't actually need that in order to save Nami. He would constantly go and do it, right? And I can probably guarantee you, Shiki might have actually known about the message, right? And to be honest, why would Shiki even care? Like, Shiki, in that moment, like, Shiki didn't see any need to care about it. Like, even if he did get the message, thing that Nami is like that, like, why should he even care? Like, he knows that moment he knew that he can beat Luffy and stuff like that. So even if Nami did leave a secret message, it's like, we'll go with this. She can leave her message and all that kind of cars. Now, even though this was never actually brought up in the movie and stuff like that, but it does bring up a very interesting detail here, like that, is that, and sure, like, Luffy was probably going a little bit too far by being very angry at Nami and like that, and being a little bit too rude in that moment. But in the regards, I don't blame Luffy for that, okay? In my opinion, Nami basically left her message, and she probably didn't leave it in the best way. But in the end, Luffy basically saves Nami, he beats Shiki, and she basically returns to the ship, okay? But should we consider this Zero or Zenith, okay? Well, probably not yet, but it's getting there, right? It's basically leading, it's probably leading even more, where the fires are even burning even farther, okay? We can probably consider Zenith in the regards it's like the toughest, it's the farthest that Luffy's ever gotten in order to get Nami back, right? It's the hardest that he's ever faced against someone in order to save Nami, right? Because keep in mind, while Luffy has faced off against many strong opponents and stuff like that, but in comparison to like those who have something to do with Nami in the regards where Luffy's actually had to go and face off against someone with Nami, in terms of like legendary or like most famous epithets and stuff like that of like really hardcore people, Shiki is probably at the top of that, right? You had Orlong, you had Inaru, and you have Shiki. I feel like there's one more. Oh, no, that's it. Yeah, I mean, aside from like minor thugs and like that, but in terms of that, I believe those are the only three that really resulted in Luffy having to face off against someone who didn't necessarily had anything to really want to do with Nami, but basically Nami was involved in that situation. And we probably have to ask, can we consider Zero? Well, Zero could be if like I said, like Nami basically leaves a message that she's going to go with Shiki, and Luffy basically gives up and decides to just let her go. We can consider Zero in that regards because he's giving up, okay? And Zenith could be like I just mentioned, like it's the highest that Luffy's ever gone, not in the sense, but it's the farthest that he's ever gone or the highest that he's ever faced off against someone in order to get Nami back, okay? how, let's see, I feel like I want to make sure I'm not missing anything, because I need to, give me a minute, I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay, how about this? So then I think the next best thing to talk about is this. So after the Marineford arc ended and things like that, and Luffy basically lost Ace, when the Straw Hats basically learned the events of what happened, Nami was basically discussing talk over Nami's events of the story and things like that. Okay, so what basically occurs here is that Nami basically finds out, and then she tries to steal this sphere thing that is supposed to help her get down to the Blue Sea. Right, Nami is on Weatheria, where Weatheria is the place where she was trained to hear time skip, where she was basically under the tutelage of Herodis. Okay. And Nami basically, when Nami basically tries to steal one of the driving machines in order to get down the Blue Sea, Nami basically mentions to all the wizard-like guys that Luffy in the newspaper is her captain, and he basically lost his brother. And Nami is actually trying her hardest to get back to Luffy because basically Nami is feeling in the need that Luffy needs Luffy needs someone right now, right? And Nami is willing to go there and let Luffy let herself be the one that Luffy needs. Okay. And there were some good moments here and like that. Like a really good moment here is when after Nami basically gets out and like that, she basically runs off Herodis as her hostage and like that. And Herodis even mentions that your fake tears are back. Nami's thinking in her head, Luffy, you've always been there for us. Now it's our turn to be there for you. Okay. And interesting point here is that even though Nami says us in regards, her tears are more like saying like me. Like even though you've been there for me, I want to be there for you, which is a very interesting topic to actually discuss. Okay. And even though in the end Nami couldn't actually get there, and she basically had to accept that Luffy will have to try and do well on his own. She basically there are a lot of like, it really goes to show you that when you look at the relationship and like how far they're willing to try and get to the other person when they know the other person is struggling or having emotional problems. All right, and it does lead to some really good things. Okay, and it's very emotional, and very leveling and telling and like that, all that kind of stuff. So. But should we consider it Zero or Zenith? Well, I feel like you can consider both. Like we consider it Zenith, and it's probably the biggest in the regards where Nami is basically like not actually meaning that she actually likes Luffy or loves Luffy, but we could probably consider Zenith in the fact that Nami is basically describing how far or how far she's willing to go for Luffy when she knows that he's actually in danger. Okay, when she basically knows that he needs someone in that in his time of need. Okay, we can consider Zero in the sense of like say. We can't consider Zero in the sense that Nami basically had to give up and just accept the fact that she can't get there to Luffy. I mean, we consider that. But a good moment could actually be if Zero could be if Nami basically had basically like give up and decided not to go back to Luffy, right? Just basically accept the fact that, hey, you know what, I like it weather. I no longer have to travel with Luffy anymore and put myself in danger, right? I'm gonna stay here forever. We can consider that an option. And I'm glad that's not the option, okay? Because that would be a terrible decision, okay? We're trying to build up a relationship, not tear it down. Alright, let's get on to the next one. I think the next best thing to actually discuss is actually Wano. Yeah, Wano. So, probably the best thing to actually discuss here is right before Nika arises and stuff like that. So, Luffy's final fight with basically Kaido before he awakens his Delph and like that. Kaido basically mentions to everyone that Luffy is dead. I have won. All right, and Nami is basically very upset and angry by that. So she's willing to go as far as call Kaido a snake and a liar, telling him that you're lying. Luffy is not dead. He couldn't have lost. Okay, and Nami, like some of the key points here is to point out that Nami, refusing to believe that Luffy's dead, that even though in that moment no one can actually sense Luffy. All right, keep in mind that no one who can actually sense Luffy like through Observation Hockey couldn't actually sense Luffy in that moment. Right, they were feeling like he was gone. Okay. And then all of a sudden, Luffy's heartbeat starts beating again. But right before that occurs, Nami basically calls out for Luffy and basically tells him, keep your promise like you made, Luffy. And all of a sudden, Luffy's heartbeat starts beating, right? And Luffy's heartbeat is actually very reminiscent of like the lyrics to Being Sake, right? Because there's part of Being Sake where it says beat upon the drums, dance upon the waves, and stuff like that. Nami's name means waves, and she's basically crying for Luffy to awaken and stuff like that. And then Luffy's heartbeat starts beating, right? Right before Luffy's heart starts beating is when Nami basically cries out for Luffy and asks him, don't give up, Luffy, right? Keep your promise. And Luffy basically rises as Nika once again. Now, there's no actual direct connections between Nika and Nami just yet. I do feel like we are going to get that eventually, maybe in the Egghead arc, or maybe in Land of the Giants and Elbaf, or maybe in Mary Joie. I feel like we are going to get that eventually. When that will occur, I'm not sure, okay? But should we consider it Zero or Zenith? Well, we can consider it 0 in a sense of, like, say, if Luffy did lose and then Nami, like, going into trouble calling Kaido a snake and liar and she calling out for Luffy and Luffy doesn't awaken, okay? We can consider Zenith and the fact that, like, you can consider Zenith and the fact that Luffy basically rising from the dead and awakening his abilities, right? It's basically his highest peak, right? He even mentioned that he's basically at his peak now, okay? We can consider Zenith in that regard, okay? But it still doesn't actually, like, it doesn't actually fully build a relationship up in that regards, but it does give some good moments and very good and touching moments to basically describe that how one of them feels for the other, or how they don't want to necessarily believe something, right? And keep in mind, while Luffy can make dumb decisions and bad decisions and dumb mistakes, and Nami can get irritated by this. A good example of this could be when she locked Luffy in a cage after they left Wano, because he basically chose to go over the waterfall instead of actually taking the safer route, right? Ended up getting locked in a cage, right? Another good moment here is when Luffy basically mentioned to all of his crew members what his dream was and why he needed to be king of the pirates in order to achieve it. And Nami, while she is very shocked and confused by this, she's even going as far as even saying, like, yeah, I expect nothing less from you, Luffy, right? That totally sounds just like you. It's a very touching moment, right? It really is. Now, right now we're in AK arc, and there's nothing really give a good connection between Luffy and Nami just yet. There might be something, but for now, there's really nothing. But overall, the story is going fine and well. Whenever the day comes that Luffy and Oda will ever write, where Luffy and Nami will basically admit that they like each other, it all just comes down to when that will actually occur, okay? And for all we know, it might actually occur to the very end of the story. It might occur on Elbaf. It could occur on Mary Joie. Like, we really don't know. And, it's, like, the way I see it is Zenith, like, in my regards, like, how I'm choosing to go with Zero and Zenith is this, okay? So, Zero would be, like, if one of them actually lost, okay? If they basically decide to give up the other person, right? If they decide not to continue on, right? That's how I would consider Zero in that regards, okay? And then Zenith would be, if I would say, like, if they finally admitted that they chose, right? I think of it like, if regards of, say, like, Nami basically says, like, tells Luffy, I want to be by your side for the rest of our lives, all right? I want to be the queen to your king. I want you to be I want to be your queen, all right? I want to be the queen of the pirates with you as the king of the pirates, all right? Something like that, okay? Staying side by side like that for the end of all time, admitting your feelings to the person you like, right? Basically, reaching the peak of your relationship up to a whole new level, right? You're basically at the zenith of your relationship, okay? And that's basically how I basically see it going forward, right? And Marriage Law might be the best place to describe this and why it might actually be perfect, because some people have even thought of and theorized that, the fact that Oda went the whole trouble of having Luffy and Nami team up with Inaru, who's basically believed a false god, and yet we have another person out there who is basically led to believe to be a god, even though the world does not know Imu, but we, the audience, are led to believe that he is a false god. Having Nami and Luffy team up once more to take down this false god only fits with the great narrative to show the great story that Oda is telling. Okay, and another good point here to point out here is that Oda, a couple years ago, Oda basically drew this picture of a 2-bit Luffy and Nami, and Luffy is basically facing off against this shadow creature who we're led to believe that it's Emu. It could be Blackbeard, but let's just say that it's Emu. And at the very under Luffy is actually Nami locked in a cage. Luffy's having to fight this creature in order to save Nami. Okay, that goes to show you that. Now keep in mind here, right? When Oda wrote that, a lot of things can change, right? For all we know, if that scene ever does get animated and stuff like that, for all we know, it could be a different person in that case, right? It could be BB, right? It could even be Hancock, right? And keep in mind, all right, I'm not trying to support the Luffy and Hancock theory, but we have to accept the fact that Oda can change his mind and choices on how he's doing his story, all right? We gotta accept that, okay? Okay. All right, but that's basically all I have. Yeah, so I'm sorry that we haven't reached the peak of the relationship just yet. The series is still going on, and we'll just have to wait for when the day actually occurs and when it actually happens. So, hey, if you enjoyed the video, anything I had to say or anything I had to offer, anything I basically provided, please let me know by smashing the like button, all right? Also, feel free to subscribe to the channel, right? I want my channel to grow, and I need people to subscribe to the channel, right? Hit notification bells if you want to keep up to date and more content on my videos provided, all right? And if you actually think this video is good and you think it's actually, and you feel like other people need to see it, go ahead and share it. I mean, heck, go as far as shoving it in people's faces, but please don't do that. Totally do it. All right, enough funny talk in this game, like that. So you all have a good day and enjoy the final part to this Luffy versus Nami video. All right, so bye everybody.